Hey guys, before we get into this video today, I want to ask you for your support in supporting independent journalism. You don't have to do it right this second, but as you watch this video, I'm going to show you a few things, and hopefully that will encourage you to support channels like ours. Yanasa TV has been facing this problem for quite some time. This is one of the most direct hits that we've ever seen. And in order to offset it, we have done a number of things to try and help keep our programs going and funded, and that includes Yanasa Trading Company, where you can go and shop for things like Buffalo wool socks or USA made knives by a young entrepreneur, or Leatherworks. We'd like to support USA made businesses on that trading company website. We're hoping to add more products soon. You could also donate to the As a Man Thinketh podcast. You could donate to our nonprofit, which focuses on agricultural production. You could do super thanks. YouTube loves super thanks. It always helps the video. Thumbs up, shares. Share this video with anybody who doesn't quite understand this whole misinformation thing. I mean, this should be a very educational video as we get through it. The point is we came under attack, and what I want to do is show these people that attacked us that when they attack us, we become stronger, because that's the only way that we're going to stop people from continuing to make deliberate attacks on independent media. Independent journalism is no different than any other journalism. It used to be the heart and soul of this country before it was all bought out. With that said, I'm going to get into the video. Hello there, friends. Welcome back to As a Man Thinketh on Yanasa TV. It's been a while since I've been on here, but I don't feel like I need to be on here every single day. If there's not a story that I don't think is worth sharing with you, I don't create a podcast. People always say consistency, 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 but I don't feel like we have to do that on Yanasa TV. We are a diversified channel with a lot of different content. Some of our content is made to last the ages, and some of it is, hot or new topics. But today is a very important topic. It's one that has recently hit home to me, and I wanted to make you guys aware of this, and I'm hoping that we can make some noise about it, because what is happening in media these days is eye-opening. A lot of you have probably noticed that you've taken a shift over the last 10 to 15 years. You've shifted from your traditional news sources, right? Your local news, your CNN, your Fox News, and you've started paying attention more to independent journalism, independent podcasts. A lot of these people have opinions mixed in with their news, but I think, it's important to remember, news is supposed to report on facts, right? Who, what, when, where, and why. And while the what can sometimes be misconstrued and the where should almost always be an exact fact, sometimes the who is somebody's opinion or, information that can be misconstrued, and sometimes the why, almost always the why, is just simply an opinion of whoever's putting the news piece out. My wife and I always talk about, when it comes to history depends on the person who wrote it, not necessarily the facts that happened back in that time frame. I mean, we depend on these stories passed down through time, and it all comes from some sort of narrative. Anyway, where I'm going with this is, these independent journalists, yes, they probably have opinions that some people disagree with, but it's important to have them because they're giving you a perspective that's not narrated by a solitary standpoint. Okay, you're getting your facts. It's important for you always to go and research your facts, to listen to what people are telling you, and do your own homework. If it's something that interests you, certainly do your own homework, and you may formulate your own opinion. I've always said on this channel, you don't have to agree with me. I'm bringing a lot of the topics up that I bring up for discussion. I'm bringing them up to build awareness around them. That's the point of As a Man Thinketh and this particular podcast. That's why we have it here on Yanasa TV. But when it comes to news, the reason why you found that shift away from it is because your local news and your hometown news stations have suddenly started plugging away with similar stories to everybody else, similar narratives to everybody else, similar opinions to everybody else. And there's an explanation for that. Back in the 1990s, we started seeing this massive growth of what we call horizontal investing, where these big investment companies that are investing your 401ks, your retirement funds, they started investing horizontally across industries. And so that if, let's say, Kroger doesn't do very well, hopefully Costco does. And so they can offset, the losses from the retailer that performs less with the retailer that then steals some of that market share. At least that was the original philosophy behind it. And you started to see this happen with news agencies as well. A lot of news agencies used to be independent news. They used to be very, very good news agencies. And over time, especially between the 90s and 2013, you started seeing this mass consolidation within, your news agencies. And today, there are about 3 corporations, maybe, a couple outsiders in there that own all of the local news stations across the United States. There's not much more than about 400 broadcast news stations. I'm talking about televised TV stations. There are over 3,000 news entities, but a lot of these media outlets are owned by a few large corporations. Sinclair is one. Nexstar is probably the biggest. They own about 200 TV stations across the U.S. Nexstar, Sinclair, I think, is around 170. There's another one called Tegna, which owns around 70. So if you consider how many of these news stations that these entities own, and then they have regional news directors, they have people that go out and help their stations perform, right? They got to get them stories. They got to give them a narrative. They can control a narrative as well, because they have complete control over these stations. And you might be thinking, well, at least there's some separation there. But if you dig a little further and you look at the top shareholders of these corporations, you'll find that the top shareholders are the same in all of them. I mean, maybe Sinclair is a slight differentiation because its top shareholders, the 41%, are still insiders. But if you compare, for example, Vanguard and BlackRock, there's some big investors in all of these. They have about as much shareholder rights as the largest shareholder in Sinclair. When you look at a company like Tegna, they own 30% of the entire company. So it becomes this issue, I think, with this investment strategy where, yes, you're trying to offset your risks, but suddenly you have this voting right within these corporations. You're on the proxies, you can control who's running them. And whether it's intentional or not, what ends up happening is you end up putting people that you like into those positions, and they start reflecting those who own them. And so you don't have diversified news. By 2013, diversified news, the opportunity to get news from multiple sources, to understand a situation from multiple perspectives, was gone in our country. And that's why you've seen this rise lately in misinformation. It's because if you don't agree with their narrative, which is the narrative that is put out by, well, a very small handful of people, right? There's a very small handful of people control this massive news industry. But if you disagree with them, or you mention topics that are different, or you have a different perspective of them, it immediately becomes misinformation. Because as that consolidation happened, this great investment project happened, people began their transition away from traditional news, and they've started moving towards other people who, research things. For example, Yanasa TV, we tend to be more of a niche. We tend to focus on certain topics that are appealing to us, but also appealing to our overall scope of work, which is in the ag space. So when we focus on topics like that, we tend to build certain knowledge in those areas. We understand how these practices work, and some people value those opinions more than they do a news station where you've got an anchor trying to cover, several different stories, many different topics. They can't possibly, completely understand them all. And then, there's, like I said, the situation of the narrative coming across the board. It's always the same. There's no other perspective there. And if there is, it's misinformation. All of that's very important for today's video. Yanasa TV has come under attack, and I realize attack might be a very harsh word for some of the sensitive ears out there, but I don't know how else to explain it. We posted a video, and within a very short time, it received millions of views, and a short time thereafter, there was a policy change. I don't know that we had any direct influence on that. You know, my wife and I kind of freak out every time something goes viral because we're like, oh my gosh, did we say something that we shouldn't have said? And I have reviewed this several times and I cannot find anything that we shouldn't have said. But I am going to go over what happened here, and I want to, for the purposes of what I've said in the opening of this video, I want to depersonalize this because I recognize that the reporter, he's probably a nice guy. He's had a lot of experience. It surprised me that he would even go down this road. But I also recognize that he is not an independent reporter. He doesn't have control over his schedule. He doesn't have control over the news he's putting out there. He's reporting to these news directors that go up this chain of people to a handful that control all the news. Fox News, I mean, if you look at the shareholders of Fox News, it's the same ones. This guy has an executive producer that maybe has just a few years. He's a freshman, less than 10 years work experience, period. He's a hard worker. The guy worked the graveyard shift for many years for a news station. I think it was like NBC 12 or something, where he was coming up with topics for morning news. And when people were drinking their coffee, they had something to watch. But you know, he has never experienced life in the independent realm of news. Now, KGW, this particular station, they do have a rich history in independent news up until 2013, which is when all this this consolidation happened within the news industry. And in fact, they were pretty well known. And one of their anchors, McCall, had gone on to be a progressive Republican governor for the state of Oregon. So, you know, traditionally a very well-known news agency with independent reporting, independent news stories, and it was privately owned for quite some time. It was acquired by a larger organization that then split off, I guess, in the late 90s. But this was all part of this big consolidation. So, a very rich history before, you know, where it is today, and it has struggled, and it came out with this program called The Story to do, you know, investigative reporting to hopefully bring viewers back to watching their program. And they decided to do a feature. They decided to do a feature on misinformation, and they used, of course, me as their prime example. And I would like to use them and their reporting as a prime example as to what misinformation actually is. And please do comment below if you can find where there was any misinformation in this report. And in fact, their main point of misinformation, they have two main points. One of them is something I said that they've taken out of the context of the video where there's an explanation. The other is a theory that in some way I am misconstruing the feelings and reactions of my audience to believe a certain thing. That is the actual action, according to them, of my misinformation. I'm going to go ahead and kind of roll through this video, and as we go, I'm going to add some comments and help you understand some of what's going on. And by the end of the video, you'll see that there was nothing that I said that was actually misinformation. This is just clearly a hit piece, an attack piece, a slander piece that was put out on us to discredit us because apparently we have now become a threat of some sort to somebody. They feel threatened if they're going to go to this extent to put a hit piece out. Okay, here we go.
We're starting tonight in Yamhill County, just outside of Newburgh, because we have a fascinating story for you. It has two parts. Part one involves the state of Oregon and the Department of Ag, which is possibly creating rules which this dairy farmer, small dairy, says could put them out of business. And then the second part involves social media and a post on YouTube with more than 2 million views, which has, shall we say, misconstrued some of the facts about those potential new rules.
Okay, I want to correct something here because, and I just noticed this listening to this video. He said these potential new rules, these new rules. And I think that that's a fact that I may have misconstrued myself in my initial video. These are not new rules, and there's no new rules being created. And even the Institute for Justice, who is representing the people in this case, has stated that these aren't new rules.
For years, the Department of Agriculture did not apply its rules for CAFOs to farms like Sarah's.
They just have never enforced the rules before. And we'll get into that as he starts showing you a bunch of government papers to support his theory of these new rules.
And it's also made this small dairy farmer the face of a political campaign that she does not agree with.
I don't know if I agree with the political campaign either. I don't know what the political campaign is. If you guys watch this channel, you know I don't belong to a political party. I don't believe in all that hogwash. And I bring up, it doesn't matter if a Republican put out some sort of law or Democrat, I don't care. What I focus on are topics of concern primarily to small farmers. I also think that sometimes these concerns reflect also on large-scale farmers, and I bring those topics up because I think that they're important for discussion. Besides that, I'm not a part of a political campaign, and half the time I don't even have answers to the things that I bring up, and I'm not suggesting any answers. Sometimes it's just for the sole purpose of discussion with you guys. So yeah, I'm not sure that I agree with this political campaign either. Just to clarify, I don't even know what it is. He doesn't say.
This is Sarah King, owner of Godspeed Hollow, a dairy with a total of 3 cows. Well, now it's 4.
Oh man. When I did my video, I said she had 3. I guess it helps when you do a video 3 months after the fact. You know, it was just, there's a fact that changed. She's got 4 now.
So we have Raya. Miss Raya delivered a beautiful baby heifer for us this morning. Well, I think it was this morning. I didn't get to see it. So, they don't like to make a scene out of it, luckily. But
Sarah's pasture covers 11 acres. Her cows mostly roam around outside and poop and pee on the ground. It becomes fertilizer for the soil. Her dairy is a small business. She sells raw milk directly to members who pay to own a share of her herd and are thus entitled to some of the milk. It's a workaround to bypass Oregon law, which prohibits selling raw milk at retail markets.
Okay. Workaround. Interesting phrase there. A workaround is generally a phrase associated with, okay, there's a law here, we need to find a way to walk around it because it's, obstructing us, and so we're going to find some sort of loophole and get through it. That's not what Sarah's business is, and I think that statement delegitimizes a lot of small dairies like Sarah's in this case. And by the way, I didn't make Sarah a star. She was about 60 seconds in a 20-minute video, but that's besides the point. Now she is. The point is that these things are not workarounds, and it's actually stated in the white papers that he will get to in a little while here, that these small dairies that are herd share dairies aren't regulated by Oregon state law because Oregon state law only covers the retail sale of milk to the consumer. It's there to protect the consumer, okay? When you're an investor in a herd share, that's a private relationship between you and a farmer, and what you're actually doing is you're paying that farmer for the services of pumping the milk and bottling the milk and all of that for you. So when you go and you pay for that bottle of milk from your herd share, that's what you're doing. Herd shares are a form of agreement, a form of a business that has been around since before the state of Oregon ever had a retail prohibition on raw milk. And actually, if you have less than 2 cows, you can still sell raw milk retail in Oregon. At least you could for a while. I don't know if they still allow that, but Oregon had a pretty good open policy when you just had a couple cows. But Sarah's got 4 cows, so now she had 3 when I first did my video. But so she's not doing this workaround. She has these investors in her herd share. It's an old time practice. It goes back centuries, well before most of the laws in the U.S. People own parts of herds or of animals, and they had access to the meats, they had access to the milks. They would pay the farmer for their services, and that's the type of business that she's in. So I don't want to delegitimize what these folks are doing, and I feel like he did that there. And actually, if you read the article on this, at the bottom of the article, if this doesn't tell you where this station's belief systems are, it says something about the I'll let you finish that word. And basically this section of the article is just a big fear-mongering warning tactic about drinking raw milk, avian flu getting into raw milk. They even have a video attached to it that they want you to watch. And you know, yes, there are warnings about raw milk right now, and I've made this clear on our channel. I think you really have to, you know where you're getting it from. That's why herd shares exist. You are an invested person in that herd share. You should have knowledge of how the operations are going, what's going on at the operations. You are an informed private consumer. You're not the retail market. So just to clarify, that is what is going on here. It is not a workaround. It is the state law, and it does not apply to herd shares.
For years, tiny dairies like Syrah's were also pretty much ignored when it came to rules about handling the waste that falls from their animals. State regulators instead focus on bigger operations, some with 1,000 cows or more. But that changed in January of 2023. The Oregon Department of Agriculture issued 2 white papers and declared that even the tiniest dairy operations would have to follow the same rules as the giant companies.
Again, so these white papers weren't a new declaration. They weren't a new rulemaking. What the first white paper that he's showing you is about is basically kind of, it's announcing an education program for small dairies. The second white paper you see there is how that education program is going to be implemented. Kudos on the Department of Agriculture of Oregon to come out with an education program that would help people get permitted instead of just coming out and shutting them down. They were recognizing the fact that under the current pretenses of state law, and this dates back to House Bill 2156 passed in 2001. And you'll notice, you know, when you read these white papers that they have 2 systems for dealing with wastewater treatment. One of them is the National Pollution Discharge Elimination System. And that first one is actually administered by the Environmental Quality Commission of the U.S. The second one is defined by Oregon state law, the Environmental Quality Commission. And this gives, you know, the agricultural department oversight of making sure that they're managing wastewater from everybody that's not covered under that federal regulation. And that was put into place over 20 years ago. And basically, you know, at that time, that's when you first see this very inclusive and intrusive, in my opinion, wording of what a CAFO is in the state of Oregon. What they've done here is they've been focusing on the big guys, which are covered under the national laws. They haven't been implementing this Oregon state law. And you know, I am a big believer in states' rights. I believe that they should have the right. That's what this House Bill 2156 was all about. Was taking the rights of management of wastewater systems into the state, having the right to regulate it the way they want to and choose who they regulate. And at that time, they chose to regulate all of these small dairies. The wording that they put into that bill was all inclusive. For a long period of time, you know, there was a statute of limitations that said that you couldn't challenge some of these bills that were put into place. Many years ago, more than 6 years ago. Somebody had emailed me the other day asking me what my thoughts were on the Chevron, the case dealing with the Chevron decision. And I found that the case had a couple helpful points to the farmers that are covered in the state of Oregon. I actually was talking about 2 different scenarios. He combines my comments of those 2 different scenarios into one person. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. But the Chevron decision by the Supreme Court, one, you know, said, okay, look, it's no longer up to these agencies to determine the law and say this is a rule based upon what the law says. And in this case, I think the law is pretty straightforward and clear. They're saying that it needs to go in front of a judge. That's why we have a judicial system. We have these different branches of government to separate the powers. So I don't disagree with that decision at all. A little oversight for these agencies is always a good thing, right? The other part of that decision, though, it was involving a case where they had gone beyond the statute of limitations to even argue the law in the first place. And the judges came to the conclusion that the statute of limitations does not begin until the day of injury to the plaintiff. And so the day of injury to the plaintiff is the day that the state of Oregon sent out letters to market gardeners that said, hey, you have to, you can't water your gardens because you don't have water rights. The day of injury to the plaintiff was the day that the state of Oregon came out and said, hey, we have to implement these wastewater treatment, programs on your property because you're considered a CAFO in the state of Oregon. So at that point in time, it doesn't matter if these are 20-year-old laws or 30-year-old laws. They have the right to go in and argue their case and overturn, maybe what that intrusive wording actually is, or ask for more clarification. It would be smart for the state of Oregon to go ahead and redefine what a CAFO is before it goes that far, because they don't want a judge coming in telling them what they can't rule a CAFO is. So anyway, that is what is actually going on here. Again, no new rules, no new regulations. I don't want to discredit the political institution of the Oregon Department of Agriculture. I think that wouldn't be doing, them any justice here. What they are doing is they're enforcing. They're saying, we haven't been doing this. We're supposed to do this. We're doing it now, but we're rolling out this education program so that they understand how to become compliant if they can afford it. I mean, that's always the big thing.
The change shocked Sarah and many others. She would have to pay for permits to install drain lines and holding tanks and frequent journaling to show how she's handling the animal waste. Do you know what it would cost if you had to follow all their requirements?
Yeah, so it's a really huge range. It could have been anywhere between $15,000 all the way easily up to $100,000 or more, depending on the level of infrastructure that they're going to require from us.
So $15,000 is a lot of money. The Institute for Justice, in their original news releases on this case, kept using, a cost standpoint of around $100,000. So imagine having to invest around $100,000 for 4 animals, and are your cow share participants going to pay for that? Where's that money going to come from? Because you'd have to milk those cows for many, many years, probably well beyond their lifespan, to be able to make up that kind of money on 4 cows.
So it's not an insignificant, and I don't care who you are, $15,000 is a lot of money anyway.
Yeah.
And if I think about even a small household that's not selling any raw milk, they're just milking their backyard goat for their own family, that's a really unreasonable ask for them.
Why was the change made? Well, one hint is right here on the front page of the state's white paper. It notes, the Department of Agriculture has received concerns from the Oregon dairy industry that many raw milk or herd share dairies are operating in Oregon without CAFO permit registrations. Unpermitted raw milk and herd share dairies enjoy an unfair competitive advantage of not having a CAFO permit by failing to pay permit fees and not bearing the cost of environmental protection contained in the permits. So basically, commercial dairies in Oregon felt the small raw milk dairies had an unfair advantage, and they convinced the Oregon Department of Agriculture to do something about it. A second white paper from the state hammered home the change. Most raw milk dairies in Oregon must be registered to a confined animal feeding operation permit, as required by federal and state law.
Okay, again, this is not a change. If you read the background, which he obviously didn't do, confined animal feeding operations are regulated under the Oregon law to prevent manure and wastewater from contaminating surface or groundwaters. Dairies meeting the state CAFO definition require a CAFO registration based on the farm's operational characteristics about the number of animals, length of confinement, and storage and utilization methods for manure and processed wastewater. Operators owning no more than 2 producing dairy cows or 9 producing goats or sheep are exempt from food and safety and fluid milk license (FSD) requirements under Oregon 621.012. Most of the state's raw milk purveyors fall into this category by actual numbers or by herd share arrangements. So there they are, they're reciting the law as to, why a lot of these people are allowed to sell raw milk. They're not covered under the state law, and they can do it. I mean, that's the law. Many raw milk dairies may mistakenly interpret the FSD exemptions as extending to the requirement for a CAFO permit issued by the Oregon Department of Agriculture. So what they're saying is that it's simply a misunderstanding of the small dairies. They're not required to go through the food safety protocols that we have in place for retail sales of milk because of their status within the state, but they're still required to follow wastewater treatment permits. They're going to make a case here that this is about protectionism. The framework and the background that the Oregon Department of Agriculture is putting out there is saying that under the current laws, this is just what the current law is. To not enforce it is protectionism of the small dairies, and that's where I felt like when I first reported on this, and very supportive of the small farms, you guys know that, but I also felt like their case against protectionism was a bit weak because with the saying this protectionism the other way as well, playing devil's advocate it is. So I would say that the law is invasive simply from the fact that they shouldn't have ever passed a law that says that these smaller operations should have to have these wastewater permits in the first place. They don't create enough to actually pollute the environment the way that the larger dairies are. I mean, it's kind of, there's no scientific data to support that argument. So they're better off after the Chevron decision. And that's just my opinion. I'm not an attorney, neither is this guy.
What was your reaction when you first learned this was going on?
My first reaction was, I don't understand how anybody in the state is going to be able to enjoy a backyard cow or goat or sheep anymore if...
That's important. How are they ever going to enjoy a backyard cow or sheep anymore? It sounds impossible, doesn't it?
They're going to ask us to go through a whole lot of hoops and pay a ton of fees in order to just have a small farm like what we have. It makes it untenable, not just from a business perspective, but from just a total property ownership perspective.
Untenable is a word that you hear a lot. What it basically means is it's unmanageable, it's unprofitable. If a business is untenable, it's no longer a viable business, okay? If property ownership becomes untenable, it means it's no longer viable for you to own that property. When something becomes untenable, it's essentially getting shut down.
Sarah turned to the Institute for Justice, a national civil rights law firm with offices in 6 states, including Washington state. She and 3 small dairies sued the state of Oregon in federal court to block that new rule. Bobby Taylor is one of the lawyers handling Sarah's case.
Our lawsuit brings claims under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, basically saying that this violates due process and equal protection because it's arbitrary and irrational to treat these dairies as though they're operations with thousands or hundreds of cows that produce that kind of waste.
And, like I said before, the statute of limitations now begins on the day of injury.
After the Institute filed its lawsuit, the Oregon Department of Agriculture had second thoughts about its plan. On March 21st, it reversed course, announcing in this release that it will not take enforcement action and that the act of milking an animal in a barn or cleaning the milking equipment did not trigger a CAFO requirement.
If you read that document closer, they didn't say that it did not. What they said was that they agreed with the opinions that it shouldn't, and they then referred back to on clarification of what a CAFO is in the state of Oregon. So what they're saying is, we agree with you guys, this is a little overburdensome. we need to send this back to our state legislators to better define what a CAFO is in the state of Oregon. They're passing the torch. They didn't confirm anything. They can't change the law themselves. That's undermining the political institution of the state house.
The state has pulled that reg back, at least temporarily.
Yeah, it's a great first start. And I think that one of those next steps really becomes more conversation with those who can help structure and shape future policy so that we get clear about what is appropriate for small farms and what is not.
I wanted to point this out. The Institute for Justice put a video out on this, and they have these terrific shots, very emotional shots, touching the cow, standing out in the field. And Pat has taken some of those shots and borrowed them for this report. And it creates this feeling of emotion. I mean, the videography is fantastic. Institute for Justice, I don't know who did your videography, but I would love to have them, or at least know some of the who they've used, subcontracted, to be a part of our videography team, because this is beautiful. I mean, look at, you know, the hand on the cow's head, and it does create a lot of emotions. Now, this video, he does change, you know, the wording behind it. The Institute for Justice's video that he borrowed the clips from is saying something completely different, but that doesn't matter. It's the visuals, right?
So you might be thinking that. Are you relieved at all now that the state has pulled that reg back, at least temporarily?
Yeah, it's a great first start. And I think that one of those next steps really becomes more conversation with those who can help structure and shape future policy so that we get clear about what is appropriate for small farms and what is not.
So you might be thinking that's the end of Sarah's problems, right? Wrong.
It seems like these types of stories are starting to become so prolific, you could almost do a video a day on this stuff. Maybe a video a week, day. Okay, that was a bit of a stretch, but I mean, you could definitely do a video a week, I think. I could think of a couple topics right now that were just within the last week.
This brings us to the second part of our story. 3 days before the state abandoned its new policy on the small dairies, this YouTuber picked up the story and ran with it.
But today I wanted to talk about the state of Oregon.
His name is Charlie Rankin. According to his LinkedIn profile, he lives in a tiny town a couple hours east of Charlotte, North Carolina. His profile says he's involved in agriculture, broadcast, media, and production.
Hey, this is good marketing, very good marketing, Pat, except for I don't actually live in a tiny town. There's nothing wrong with small town America. Let's hear it for small town America. I actually, my postal service comes from that tiny town. I live out in the country, dude. And I don't live close to Charlotte at all. I actually live in a county that is one of the fastest growing counties in North Carolina because of the Raleigh and Chapel Hill metro massive consolidation that's been going on. And both of those areas, ironically, are on the top 10 list of educated cities or metro areas in the U.S. So, it is definitely feeding growth in our county, and, you know, we're seeing it every day. I mean, you try and buy a lot of land around here for something affordable. But point is there's nothing wrong with being from a tiny town. If you guys think there's something wrong from being from a tiny town, don't, okay? There's nothing wrong with that. I think this is great marketing for me. Thank you, Pat, for putting that up there. I would like to just kind of add something that you left off of my LinkedIn profile, because I worked hard on my profile, Pat, and I wanted people to actually, you know, read some of it. You just kind of gave them an overview. I guess the overview doesn't really help the narrative, but this is from my About section, just to add to the marketing here. Promoting an agricultural environment through videography where biodiversity of life prospers and stewardship functions to conserve creation in its own capacity to sustain and enrich our lives, advocating for free enterprise and entrepreneurship in agriculture. You like that? All right. Let's move on.
And he has a YouTube channel called Yanasa TV. It's very much pro-farmer and full of worry. One of his playlists has titles including A Disaster is Coming and The World Has Lost Its Senses.
Okay, well, there is a disaster coming. I don't know of any active hurricane season, very active hurricane season, that has not had a disaster, and that's what the video was about. And as for the world has lost its senses, it has when it comes to how we raise our kids. That's what that video was about. I mean, think about it. We have lost our senses when it comes to, and I'm, not necessarily talking about independent parents, but I'm talking about the public school system, all of these things. If you listen to that video, it's a very good video. And I think a lot of people agree with me on the fact that we've kind of lost direction when it comes to our youth.
And Denver legislation intends to bankrupt farmers en masse.
It does. If you read what they've stated on their legislation, that's the one where they're trying to shut down the slaughterhouse in the city of Denver and then reuse the area where the slaughterhouse was for affordable housing. And on the website of the advocacy group that is trying to put this measure on the ballot, they talk about repurposing the farms that they know they're going to bankrupt by putting down their slaughterhouse. It's really, all factual headlines. If you guys need help with your headlines, just reach out to me. I'm pretty good at them.
And the title of this video is Oregon Urgently Shuts Down Small Farms en Masse to Protect the People.
If you watch the video, yeah, because it talks about more than Sarah. It talks about all the market gardeners, in different areas of the state of Oregon. It's interesting. Pat first contacted me about this months ago. And then I put out a second video talking about Oregon shutting down more market gardeners, and then he contacted me again. Just because the state of Oregon, just because KGW had a relationship with a governor, or one of their anchors is a Republican governor in the past, doesn't mean that they have any type of relationship now with the state. But I'm sure, that there's something that I'm saying in those videos that's saying, hey, we need to get this guy. We need to shut him down as quickly as we can. He's saying too much about our state. But it's true. It is true. You send out 24 letters in one round, and then the second video was about round 2, and I've actually received some emails from people who are impacted by that. And then you look at this other department, so that's from the water department, you have the agricultural department, then coming out and saying all these people with cows in their backyard and goats, they need to get, permitted. Well, that's going to shut them down. They can't afford, a lot of these people can't even afford $15,000, $5,000 nonetheless.
Possibly creating rules which this dairy farmer, Small Dairy, says could put them out of business.
It makes it untenable, not just from a business perspective, but from just a total property ownership perspective.
And I don't see a sustainable way for other small dairy farms to be able to continue to exist if we're going to put these regulations on them. So
these regulations were shutting down farmers en masse, and it was all to protect the people, to protect the water, to protect the waste disposal of water. That title, once again, was fitting. You just aren't covering the whole story, just pieces of it.
It certainly gained a lot of attention. I first heard about it from viewers in early April, asking if it was true. Back then, the video...
I hope you're a subscriber now.
The video had 2 million views. Now, it's more like 3 million, with more than 29,000 comments. And our small dairy operator, Sarah King, well, she plays a starring role in that YouTube video.
She had about 60 seconds in a 20-minute video.
Okay, so here's an example for you. Sarah King, who owns Godspeed Hollow Farm in Newberg, Oregon, has a pickup station that's just 100 feet in length. She has an 11-acre property and keeps things pretty simple. She has 3 milking cows. She's been shut down for being called a CAFO.
That's not true. She has not been shut down.
That's not true either, Pat. See, you're cherry picking words and you're not giving the full context of it. And secondly, I need to correct myself. I didn't talk about Sarah's farm for 60 seconds. It was more like that 10 seconds that were right there. I talked about the issue, though, for just a couple minutes. And in that conversation, I talked about Sarah and the other farms in the full context. And guess what I said?
There's an injunction on the definition of the law until it can be heard in court, since the League of Justice or whoever they are have filed a court case in January to try and stop it. So currently, small dairy farmers, the way that I first read the article, you would think that they were going after raw milk. That always seems to be the case with a lot of these things. But this is actually going after anybody, egg producers, anybody who has chickens that go up in a chicken house at night that may have a concrete floor that's easy for cleaning or whatever it is. And you have to go through a permitting process. And a lot of what they're requiring is just simply too much for the small farmer. So that's rule number one that's been impacting.
Shutdown is a phrase that I think a lot of you understand what I mean by that. If your business becomes untenable because of a rule, if you're a business, if you don't see how anybody could possibly enjoy an animal in your backyard because of this rule, that includes yourself in that statement. If you say that something is too expensive, the fees are too high because of this rule, I mean, you're basically saying the same thing I am. You're effectively shut down. But in the video, to clarify, I said that there was an injunction on the state of Oregon imposing this rule while it was being litigated. And that's something that you see typically in a lot of lawsuits, is that when they file the lawsuit, they'll stop the state from moving forward with enforcement until they can find a solution in the court system. And I said that in the video.
There's an injunction on the definition of the law until it can be heard in court, since the League of Justice or whoever they are have filed a court case in January.
Which meant that at the time that the video was published, they were still operating, they weren't shut down, they were threatened to be shut down, and as Pat stated at the beginning of the video, the law could have shut her down.
The Department of Ag, which is possibly creating rules which this dairy farmer, small dairy, says could put them out of business.
So this is the one piece of misinformation, and he pronounced it very well at that point in time. But it is actually misinforming you of what I said. Therefore, in and of itself, it is misinformation.
That's not true. She has not been shut down.
There's an injunction on the definition of the law until it can be heard in court.
We're going to get into a little bit here in this video how, what they describe as misinformation, and then I want you to look back at all the points that I've been discussing here and see how it plays out with this university professor, Professor Smith's analysis of what creates misinformation, because that was cherry picking a line out of a video, not giving it the full context, and not accurately stating what I actually said about this whole section of the video talking about the law, its impact on farmers, and the fact that the enforcement was not moving through while it was in litigation.
There's an injunction on the definition of the law until it can be heard in court, since the League of Justice or whoever they are have filed a court case in January.
That was an important fact here, kind of ruins Pat's whole video.
Has not been shut down. I told Sarah I've been getting emails from viewers worried about her.
Yeah, trust me, I've had a few emails myself.
Yeah.
Yes.
It makes it look pretty dire.
It does make it look dire. I don't know who the person is that produced the video and published it. They have quite the following. There was a couple of things that were not quite as accurate for our story as were portrayed, but that's okay. So I think one of the most important parts is that we were not shut down. We did not receive a cease and desist letter by the state, so I want to assuage that.
Nobody's trying to take your farm.
Nobody's trying to take my farm.
Okay, hold on, back up. This is where, the telephone tube gets a little too long for me here. The only thing I said about Sarah's farm was I was referring to this particular situation with the CAFO wording and the lawsuit and the fact that the state of Oregon was currently put on hold from enforcement. The cease and desist letters, in my video, I said went out to people watering their gardens, and these are market gardeners, and it was not to say you can't operate your farm, it was to say you can't water your crops, which, has the same impact, right? But it was a cease and desist on the watering of the crops. I'm pretty sure the video was clear on that. And I never said anybody was trying to take Sarah's farm. Who are these evil people? Come on, Pat, we're not spreading conspiracy theories here now, are we? Jeez, imagine that, somebody trying to take Sarah's 11-acre farm.
So that was not accurately portrayed, but
there is an issue.
There is an issue.
Yeah.
There's definitely an issue.
Which is why she's suing the state, and the lawsuit is continuing, to get the state to permanently drop its push to impose those environmental rules on her tiny dairy. I contacted the YouTuber. He insisted his facts are correct and ignored my question about taking down the video.
To clarify here, I did not ignore his question, and I actually shared word for word my conversation with Pat, because I think it's important that you don't mislead people on direct conversations that you've had with somebody, and that you don't misinterpret them. That could get you sued. So what I actually told Pat, he approached me and said, you know, this video is misinformation. The fallout has been, you know, horrific. I'm going to put this up on the screen. I don't want to read the whole thing to you this time. I've already done that. And I asked him, you know, what exactly was misinformation in the video? And he quoted several points of the video that, if you notice, he hasn't even brought up these points. And that's because if he did, they were taken out of context from the timeline of the video. And the actual points were true, which is why he also doesn't address them in this video. The only thing he addresses was Sarah and I getting shut down. And that's because that was a comment on my part that was made very strong, very emphasized, and then later explained, you know, about this part of them not actually enforcing it pending litigation. So they filed a lawsuit because it would have had dire consequences on their farm. As Pat stated,
Possibly creating rules which this dairy farmer, Small Dairy, says could put them out of business.
as she has stated.
It makes it untenable, not just from a business perspective, but from just a total property ownership perspective.
So nothing's been refuted here, exactly. But what I did say to Pat was that I would create a video. This is common in media. You put out a correction, right? If you've said something that was misconstrued by the public, or you said something that was a misstated fact, then you usually would put out either a note at the bottom of the video, or you would put out another video further explaining it. And so I promised Pat that I would put out another video further explaining what I meant by saying that these farms were getting shut down. And I aired that video.
And in case you were wondering, it sort of made me mad.
It could be a very negative thing, right? So if somebody does put out a story where it could be taken the wrong way, it's always important to correct that information. Now, Pat Dorse from KGW8 recently contacted me, and I wasn't going to do this video at first, but I was talking to somebody else, and they said I should, and I promised Pat that I'd put a correction video out.
So no, I didn't ignore Pat. He's trying to make it sound as if I was just kind of, yeah. But I also don't believe in taking down videos. I think that a common practice in media is to make a correction or to further explain a point made in the video. And, you know, it's a common practice. It's not anything unusual.
And it's been, decades in the making.
Steve Smith is a political science professor at Arizona State University. He's studied the way that various political groups cherry-pick information to push their narrative. He's talking in general here and says it's common to find videos that use selective facts to fit the stories they want to tell.
There's just an extremely powerful incentive to keep feeding that audience. And regular news probably doesn't produce enough content.
Okay, I see the problem that's going on here. So UNASA TV produces content, two different types of content. I, As a Man Thinketh, is a podcast that focuses more on current events. Sometimes it's just life lessons, and those tend to stick around for a long period of time. We also produce documentaries. We produce a lot of different types of content that stand the test of time, right? They never really lose interest. There's always somebody that wants to watch them. And that creates a portfolio of videos that continues to get views whether or not we're up here actively posting or not. It's a fairly good strategy. For a news agency, though, that can be very, very difficult. You have to constantly come up with some sort of story. And when you're just focused on an area like Portland, it gets tiring talking about drugs every day and mayhem on the streets. So you have to come up with something else. You need to keep people's interests going, right? People don't want to, they can walk outside and see some of the stories that they're covering. So it's really hard, I think, for these news agencies to have something fresh every single day. And so they make stuff up, like a misinformation video on on a podcaster. Let's try and damage his reputation, get people's emotions rolling.
So one way to do this, and of course one way to keep people coming back, is to play on their emotions, to play especially on their fears. And one way to play on their fears is to twist every bit of news so that there is something scary about the future that is generated by your interpretation of those events.
And that's what they're doing with this whole misinformation thing. They're trying to make people concerned that they're getting fed a bunch of lies, that they're being steered down these political paths. I don't belong to a political party. I don't even know why they're bringing politics into this thing. But they're trying to make people become fearful of independent journalists. That's the fear tactic here. Fearful of that, and if you read the article, fearful of raw milk. And they've used the word misconstrued, misinformed numerous times throughout this video. So far, they've had one hard fact that they've hit on, that I said she was shut down. And like I said, the original video already refuted that.
So cherry picking a few facts that give it some credibility, quoting a government document or showing a government document, or...
You could tell Pat's taking notes there, and he did that in this video. Ironically, showing government documents, putting a few facts out that are actual facts.
Or showing a snippet of someone's comment, borrowing from other videos, are all ways of getting a few things that technically are facts, but then the real action is stitching together a more complete story that fabricates the larger picture, generates a conspiracy, even generates lies about what in fact is happening.
The video featuring Sarah's Dairy appears to be fueling fear and an outrage among many across the country who, according to their comments, believe the government is trying to control the population by shutting down farms.
Pat just cherry-picked 5 comments out of 29,000. So I went and I watched this video on YouTube, and I picked out 5 comments out of 29 that I thought were pretty similar. If you don't think they're trying to take away people's freedom for self-reliance, you aren't paying attention. Why is the government trying to shut down these farms? Whoever approved that white paper should be investigated thoroughly for corruption. Fight back. Oh, be careful, Nancy. Pat might think you're trying to incite violence with that one. Some of the comments, I'll give a few more, even seemed a little sarcastic. Golf course is okay. Taking farmland for computer industry, okay. Unless they actually feel that way. I mean, I don't know, this is Oregon. Then there were some comments that just seemed completely uneducated on the subject. For example, this one, small farms need to be environmentally responsible as well. And as a collective, they have just as much impact as one of the large organizations. That is actually not true. Look, folks, you guys are welcome to say whatever you want to say in the comment section. Have at it, comment away, do what you want. If you start being disrespectful to somebody, hateful towards somebody, bullying somebody, I will monitor that because I don't appreciate cyberbullying. I will say though that some of the comments on KGW8's video were bullying me. I don't really care. But the point is, you know, you guys have the right to formulate your own independent thoughts, and you can share them. I think that you sharing them is a great thing. Sometimes I disagree with you, sometimes I agree with you, sometimes you change my perspective, and I know that that's happening for everybody else who reads the comment section. If there's an overwhelming number of commenters on my video and on Pat's video that share this concern, maybe there's a larger concern out there. Are we the ones who determine everything for society, Pat and I? Or does society determine that? I mean, this is kind of like your chance to vote in the comment section, right? Share your thoughts, share your opinions, bring it out. There's no conspiracy here. I'm not manipulating the way you're thinking, and I'm definitely not, you know, encouraging any different thought process than KGW is. We're getting the same comments.
The video also merges 2 separate issues. Later, the YouTuber discusses the Department of Agriculture sending letters to water users saying they could not irrigate their gardens without purchasing water rights. That issue is totally separate from Sarah and the raw dairy issue.
And that's all he says on it, because everything I said was fact. And the thing that I was kind of the point of my video is you have these two different departments, right? They have these two different, very old laws that have been on the books for decades, okay? One day, they both decide we're gonna start implementing these laws. I guess it could be, considered misconstrued for me to think that there's anything to that. But I also think it could be misconstrued to think that there's not anything to that. I don't know how often these departments correlate with each other or talk to each other, but it does seem rather strange that you have these laws that haven't been implemented for a very long time, ever. That's been the status quo. And then all of a sudden they say, we're going after them, we're shutting these people down. I mean, it wreaked havoc on small farmers. And that's what my video was about, is the fact that both of these agencies came out with these enforcements at the same time, and it was having a detrimental impact on the farming community. And I wanted to raise awareness about it because I care about having the liberty of choice of where my food comes from. I care about having the ability to go out and buy food from a local farmer. I like the idea of supporting my local economy. And if I were in Oregon, I would be absolutely furious. It would be eye-opening to me. And I don't, as far as the correlation between the two, I don't know. But they both operate under the state. So maybe there was some sort of thing within the state. There's no telling. I'm not a part of it. I don't know. But I do think it's weird. I think it's a little strange. I'm allowed to have that opinion. But I'm also allowed to have an opinion that it's not a good thing, okay? And something needs to give. These poor market gardeners are still not watering their crops. They can't get the water to water their crops because they have to get water rights, which is very hard in the state of Oregon. My earlier response to Pat's video that he said I ignored, I go into detail on that and I help explain that. And I'm gonna actually start, this has encouraged me a little bit here. I'm gonna start bringing more people on from the state of Oregon to talk about these issues on this channel so you can hear it directly from a group of farmers. We're not gonna make this one farmer a star. We're gonna help people understand how these legislations are impacting people. And they've known, a lot of these people have known that these laws were on the books, but they were never enforced. It was kind of the status quo. It wasn't a big deal. And then all of a sudden it is a big deal, and that's where, there's been a lot of confusion, a lot of hurt feelings. But like I said, to me, it was eye-opening. It was like, whoa, too much all at once. And you're taking away my liberty of choice if I'm an Oregon resident.
But in the YouTuber's mind, it apparently is all part of the attack on farmers by the government of Oregon. I told Professor Smith that for a time, Sarah was inundated with messages of concern from people who saw her in the North Carolina video.
Concern is an interesting word to use there. I would say inundated with support, because that's what people were doing when they were reaching out to Sarah, was they were supporting Sarah. And I realize that not everybody likes to be contacted. I realize that not everybody likes people reaching out to them. But concern makes it sound like it's a bad thing. Guys, you're not a nuisance, okay? Being supportive is a good thing in society. Being supportive of your local farmers is a good thing. And I would argue, concern, the word concern is to have feelings or emotions about something. You wouldn't reach out to her if it wasn't in a supportive way. A concerned citizen is a good citizen. There's a lot of people that say that, and I think it's an important message.
Well, and her response is one by one. How many people can she possibly talk to as an individual? Well, maybe dozens, but that's it. But tens of dozens of thousands have actually seen a video like that. So how many have not contacted her, but whose behavior has or their thoughts about Oregon policy have been altered by virtue of that kind of an ad?
My thoughts on Oregon policy were altered the second that you had two different departments coming out with enforcement actions on old rules on small farmers all at the same time. And like I said, maybe there's no connection between the two, It is odd, but maybe there's no connection between the two. It doesn't change the fact that these are bad policies. It doesn't change the fact that it has changed my opinion of the state of Oregon.
And since this is such a massive enterprise and it occurs on such a wide scale, its cumulative effect, even though each individual video that's misleading has a minuscule effect, the cumulative effect of this is that large fractions of the American public can be misled about what government is doing. This is really undermining the legitimacy of traditional American political institutions in a very basic way.
Okay, so now I'm apparently an anti-government conspiracy theorist, and I think that if to say that somebody who disagrees with a policy or disagrees with something is against the government is, in my opinion, putting down the political institutions of the United States, disregarding them. Because the reality is the government's a very big blanket. Okay, you can't possibly throw that out and catch everybody under one opinion. There are people in government who support big ag. There are people in government who support small ag. There are people in government who hate all ag. There are people in government who are supportive of all ag. There are people in government everywhere with all sorts of opinions and thoughts. And that's the beautiful thing about America and how our republic was formed. And we also have these elected officials who do something. They get out there to get themselves elected. They get themselves involved, to put themselves into office, to represent different facets of people around this country. And it's a beautiful thing if you think about how it's supposed to work. Oftentimes, we feel like it's heavy-handed in one direction or another, and that's because of our election cycles. There's always a loser, there's always a winner, and it's always kind of changing in this constant battle of balance. But that constant battle of balance and that constant reworking of laws and regulations is what makes America, America. That's all of that going back and forth and changing things. It's going to happen for the rest of our lives. It's going to happen, hopefully for our kids' lives if we can keep it together. But that is what America is built on. That's what it's about. And that's what the founding fathers wanted us to do. They wanted us to work out our differences, to have to challenge laws, to have to challenge and think through policies. And that constant process of doing that is what ultimately makes a strong society, what ultimately makes it a good society. The second anybody tells you, because you oppose me, you are misinformation. Because you oppose me, you oppose the government. Because you have a different viewpoint of me, you are a conspiracy theorist, or you should be put down or shut up. Those people, and granted they have the right to have that opinion, but those people have no respect for how the government works, because that's not how it's supposed to work. I'll let them come in there with their opinions, and hopefully there's enough other people with me to say, no, you're wrong. But, eventually, what if these people did get enough control? That would be a scary thing, because you wouldn't have those differences of opinion. You wouldn't have the ebb and flow of policy. So that's concerning to me a little bit. But I love, America. I love what our government, how it's designed, what it's supposed to do, how our representatives are supposed to be able to go in there and have a say for many voices, and keep it diversified, have a representation for small and large groups. That's how the system was designed. Just because I disagree with your viewpoints does not make me anti-government. You don't know what the heck you're talking about. But for the purposes of creating a video on misinformation, instilling fear among people, to make me some sort of anti-government conspiracy theorist, definitely kind of adds to the drama a little bit. So, we'll roll with it.
I wanted to interview the YouTuber on camera talking about his video, and twice offered to do a Zoom interview with him. But each time he avoided the offer and insisted various parts of his video are accurate.
That's not accurate, Pat, and you know that. This is why I think if you're going to share a conversation with somebody, you should at least put it out there for people to be able to pause the video and read through like what I'm doing right now, because I think this is an important fact. I didn't just ignore Pat, and I didn't say I wouldn't interview. And maybe, Pat did interpret it as me saying, no, I don't want to interview with you. But I kind of interpret this conversation as I responded. And I said, hey, Pat, you've been approaching this whole thing from the standpoint of misinformation. I didn't think it was going to be a good story for KGW because they were going to have to really stretch it to make it sound like, this whole misinformation angle creative, but, it was a stretch. So I suggested to Pat, why not approach this from the standpoint of finding solutions? That could be an interesting angle, and it's one that I've been working on trying to pull together some different people. Some farmers have reached out to me with different solutions that they think might help, or they're trying to get to work in the state of Oregon so that they can move forward with their market gardens and other things like that. And that, I think, is a good conversation to have. Okay, we've addressed the problem, now let's address the solutions. He didn't respond to me. And obviously from him not responding to me, he decided to move forward with his misinformation video, which, you guys be the judge of it. I don't feel like it was a very good angle. I feel like, if anything, it hurt their credibility, because the only thing that they've refuted so far in the video was when I said that she got shut down, which I already refuted in my initial video. So did they refute anything? No. And then the other points that he brings up, the cease and desist orders, somebody trying to take her land away. I never said anybody was trying to take Sarah's land away. And the cease and desist orders were actually going out to people using water to water their market gardens. So that was completely taken out of context, which people who produce these misinformation videos often do, according to Professor Smith.
Back at her farm, Sarah can do little about that video, but she wants you to know she is okay and that you should not believe something just because you see it on a social media platform.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that video has gotten a lot of traction.
A couple million views, I think.
A couple million views from what I heard.
So I've heard. Did I hear that right?
A couple million views, I think.
A couple million views from what I heard.
Has Sarah actually seen the video? I reached out to Pat asking him if he actually confirmed whether or not she had watched the video herself. He didn't respond. But generally, when I say, so I've heard, that means that I don't actually, I'm going third party, right? Hearsay.
Do you worry misinformation is in there?
I do worry that misinformation is in there, and I really would say, keep track of what's happening both from the Oregon Department of Ag site, because they, of course, are publishing what's happening from the department side, and then you can also visit the Institute of Justice site and look at what's happening from the case update.
But now, hopefully, you see there is
a lot more to her Thanks for all your emails of concern about Sarah, but now hopefully you see there is a lot more to her story. And don't just take my word for it, by the way. After the YouTuber posted his video, the Oregon Farm Bureau felt compelled to issue a statement about it. First, they noted that they consider all agriculture in Oregon to be overregulated by the government.
Don't we all?
But they also added to suggest that the state of Oregon is targeting small or backyard farms is a stretch.
It could be a stretch, but what does the word stretch really mean?
So, please don't believe everything you see on social media. Just remember Sarah's story. If you're wondering if what you're reading is too good to be true or too awful to be true, odds are, might be. Check with local media to see. Now,
I know that's a lot to say.
Yeah. Oh, man. Check with local media. Yes, there's the punchline there, folks. Check with local media. I am your authority in this news source. People, don't believe everything you see on KGW's YouTube channel. Do your own research, and I often say that on our channel. Do your own research. When I bring up topics for discussion, it's impossible for any news reporter or anybody to present that where, when, why, how, without having some sort of opinion in there. And it gets really confusing today when there's so many of these local news agencies that are all being pushed with the same narrative by the same ownership of people who are selecting the same types of leaders for those local news outlets. It quickly becomes a single-sided narrative, a single-sided story, and it becomes very easy to say the other side is misinformation. I think that you should listen to the discussions on these topics, listen to the opinions. That's why news agencies often bring in outsiders to ask questions to ask their opinions of, like he did here with Professor Smith. What is your opinion on this situation? You know, all of that is important for you to do. And it's also important for you to listen to independent media journalists, people who do their own research, who have maybe a focus or a niche in an area that understands how industries work, that understands how these policies will actually impact these farmers, because then you'll be able to formulate your own decision. But don't just take one person's word for it, ever. That's not a very wise thing to do. Anyway, guys, there was nothing refuted in that video. This entire thing was a slander video put out by Tegna Corporation. And if that's not their practices, then they need to figure out a little bit of what's going on down the line, because there wasn't a single fact that they refuted in that video, but they made the entire thing about discrediting Yanasa TV, which in a way makes me feel good. It makes me feel like we're actually doing something. We're getting the word out there. One thing I wanted to add in here real quick is when it comes to news topic videos that are of current events, things that are going on right now, they tend to get most of their views within a few days. After that few day period, and you can see charts of this, especially anybody who produces content like KGW on YouTube knows this. After those few days, the newsworthy event tends to taper off. It doesn't get a whole lot of views. It's not that profitable to the YouTuber. That's not a reason for actually keeping the video up. My reasoning for actually keeping the video up is so that people can go back and reference it if something like this comes up. I don't change anything. I don't modify things. I let you be able to do your own research on me and my reporting. That's transparency. Well, guys, I hope you got something out of this video. I hope it was as eye-opening for you as it was for me. You know, when they put out this video on misinformation, I was thinking, oh my God, what did I say? What did they get me on? And then I watched the entire video and thought, he didn't refute anything I said. And the one point that he stuck to in the center of the video, I actually explained in my original video that the state of Oregon was stopped from enforcement during litigation. That means that they were not currently shut down. And when Pat said I didn't clarify that correctly, I came out with another video, which he says I ignored his response, but no, I created another video. I took the time, Pat. Give me some credit. But the point is that this is what they're calling misinformation. This is what one of the largest news organizations in the United States, and is owned by the same shareholders who own all the other big news organizations. This is what they're referring to as misinformation. They don't have to refute anything. All they have to do is put that fear inside your head, that independent journalism is bad. And they're doing that because they make money off of local news. They can't stand having you guys go out and listen to independent podcasters. The podcast industry is killing them. That's a challenge for them, and it becomes an even bigger challenge when they're all owned by the same people, and they're all getting the same hiring policies, and they're all hiring the same type of people. There is no differentiation in the news. In a scary way, it's becoming a propaganda point for large corporations who own the majority of the shares of these companies. Those are facts. All of this entire video was malarkey. So today I'm asking you for your support to continue to help us grow Yanasa TV. I want to generate enough support that we can get additional videographers. I want more documentaries going. I want all these things here on Yanasa TV, but I want it to be independent.